It's wonderful to see you all here. Some of you have been here in the church for the whole day, and some of you are new. So it's nice. My name is Pelle Marklund, and I am one of the pastors in the church here. And we are really glad to have you all here today. Donsö. Donsö is a place that through centuries has been characterized by shipping and by a spirit of initiative. People from Donsö are not afraid to roll up their sleeves, run large projects, and come up with new inventions. The people of this island has also through the years carried a strong commitment to the Christian faith and to the Christian church. Olof Eriksson is the name of the man who founded this church. Olof had the same profession as some of the first Christians who walked with Jesus 3 years, 2,000 years ago. He was a fisherman. A stormy night in September 1874, Olof and his crew were out at the sea. A great wave threw 2 men overboard, and the ballast shifted, and the boat was leaning heavily to one side. For a long time, the crew fought to get the 2 men out of the water, but they could only rescue one of them. Olof hurried under the deck and started to put the ballast back in place. He was overcome by grief. He had just seen his own brother drown in the waves of the roaring storm. And he was worried that the storm might claim all of their lives. He fell to his knees and he called out to God. God, if you do exist, and if you do have a power to save our lives, I will dedicate the rest of my life to serve you. By the grace of God and good seamanship, they made it ashore. For 1 year, Olof pondered over how he could use his life to serve God. And he went to the priest on the neighboring island. The priest read to him a verse from the Bible. Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I shall give you rest." Through this scripture, Olof met God, and it changed his life. And he started to read the Bible in his home. And he read it out loud, and people came to listen to him. This is how this church started to grow. In 1974, 100 years after the dramatic event at the sea, this church building was built. From our congregation and from this church, Donsö Missionskyrka, welcome. May God bless each and every one of you. Welcome.
Thank you, Pelle, and warm welcome. Some of you were here also before lunch, and I think the financing meet we had then was fantastic. So thank you all, and hopefully the commercial meet, which we now are starting, will be as good. I'm Carl Fager. I am your host today, and but I will quickly pass over here to the moderator for this commercial meet, and I want to introduce the head of Stena Rederi, Carl-Johan Hagman. A big hand.
So thank you very much. It's truly humbling to be here. Even more so humbling, and I'll do this very short, because we have with us today three absolute giants from Gothenburg. Giants in the sense that when we were planning this a couple of months ago, we said, can we get one poster name that will help us fill the church? We had three people on the list. We contacted all three, and all three came. And I must say that Gothenburg has the ability to produce individuals who set a global footprint and who are part of really the development and the transformation of the world. And the fact that they want to come to Donsö a day like this, all three together, I think makes me very humble, and I'm sure everybody on the island. But I think it's very much a testimony to what Donsö stands for, and that is what we're going to talk about during the next hour and a half. I would argue that it has never been more interesting to be in shipping than it is today. Others would argue that no, not at all. Since the 16th century, when the Dutch started industrialized shipping, we have been a cyclical business. We have seen ups and downs, and we've transformed ourselves like no other business has, because we are so global, and we have been so global for such a long time. This many ship owners have experienced brutally and not survived. Others have persevered and made fortunes. We are in Donsö here today celebrating a Klondike that apparently has had the ability to not only persevere, but to prevail in a very, very complicated world. During the morning, we spoke about the environment. We have 85,000 legacy vessels that have an economic lifetime for decades to come. We are on the threshold of the fourth industrial revolution, with technology redefining the way we live our lives and the way the world is working. Since 5 years back, in purchase power parity, China is the world's largest economy. And we are seeing that the policies of trade are changing a world order that has been around since 1609, when the lawyer Hugo de Groot wrote his defining book, Mare Liberum. All of a sudden, we cannot take that for granted any longer. In the shipping industry, we have our own analysis. In the shipping industry, we myopically study what our competitors are doing. Today, we are going to have the opportunity to listen to three people who will give us an outside perspective of our industry, and an ability to have a conversation around the aspects that ship owners take risk in continually. Trade volumes, trade patterns, logistics requirements, carbohydrates, or hydrocarbons rather, as cargo, and carbohydrates, I don't know if I get that wrong, hydrocarbons as a fuel. To help us in this conversation, may I first introduce Cecilia Malmström, our EU Commissioner in Brussels. And please, Cecilia, come to the stage. I had the privilege of being at the World Economic Forum in Davos in the beginning of the year. And I can tell you, EU bureaucrats do not come in very high regard. Cecilia walks through the room as a rock star. I know what you have done with the WTO, what you've done with your bilateral relations. We are extremely proud that you're Swedish and that you are from Gothenburg. Most importantly, how grateful we are for the good that you're doing for all of us. Karl-Henrik Svanberg, sort of a second giant. How can I even be in your midst? Chairman of BP, chairman of Volvo, by far Sweden's largest and most important company. And this old saying, when Volvo does well, Gothenburg does well. And right now, Volvo does very well. And we're extremely grateful that you want to be here. And then we have Alrik Danielsson, and Alrik, head of SKF. This is my personal nemesis, because Alrik is challenging his own industry and industry around him like no other CEO in Sweden is doing. And I must say, Alrik, sharing your insights from today with us will be the highlight of the conversation. So I've asked each of our three giants a 5-minute presentation from their points of view on these topics I outlined, and then after we will have a small conversation amongst the three of us. So if I may, Cecilia, if you would like to start.
Thank you very much, Carl-Johan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here. And it is really the place to be if you're interested in shipping. When I meet people from the shipping business in Brussels, and they ask me, where do you come from? And I say, I'm from Göteborg. Göteborg, well, that's close to Donsö, isn't it? And that's how they see Donsö. And I say, yes, it is. So it's great to be here. All of us unite here because we are people of the sea, people of oceans, shipping, transport. And I think that puts a certain mark on your identity, because we are used to trade, used to meeting people, used to bring ideas, goods, innovation, cultural experiences. And that is part of a very early globalization that Donsö Shipping and many of you have contributed to for centuries. Of course, shipping brings jobs, growth, investment, and international contacts that you and your predecessors have done. And I know also that one of the biggest challenges that you obviously discussed this morning, how you can make shipping more sustainable, environmentally friendly, where many of you are really in the forefront of innovation, research, and experiences here, and thank you for the work you're doing here. Maritime transport, of course, is very important for the world and for Europe. European ship owners control 40% of the world merchant fleet, 60% of world container carrying, and employs 650,000 people. It contributes, the figures from last year, to 57 billion euros to GDP. And 90% of global trade happens at sea. So, of course, what happens in the global trade area is extremely important for you and for others as well. And you are affected by the trends in global trade. Together with my collaborators in Brussels, we try to negotiate free trade agreements for you and for others. And in those negotiations, we fight very hard for the shipping industry to make sure that we open new markets, that we have cheaper and easier access, that European ships get access to sometimes very closed markets when it comes to dredging or ice breaking or other maritime services, feedering, but also that there is an equal footing when it comes to access to harbor, to loading, etc. And I think we have tried to be very offensive lately. We have since 2 years now an agreement with Canada. Just a couple of months ago, the free trade agreement between EU and Japan entered into force. That is, EU and Japan is 1/3 of global GDP, so it's quite a lot of economy in that. We have one with Singapore that I hope will enter into force very soon, in a couple of weeks. Singapore, of course, is a giant when it comes to shipping. Vietnam, hopefully also, will be voted by the European Parliament. It's done. It has to be voted by the European Parliament this fall. And we have also concluded with Mexico, and just before the summer, with the 4 countries of Mercosur, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay, where the maritime service chapter was one of the last chapters to be finalized. It was quite difficult, but we managed to open up there as well. And we're also negotiating with Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, Chile, and maybe something else I've forgotten. And this is, of course, important for jobs, for growth, for investment, but it also sends a signal. And that's, I think, is something we need to talk about here today. It sends a global signal that Europe, with these countries and all the companies that constitute us, we stand up for multilateralism, for global trade, for rule-based trade. We say no to trade wars. We say that trade is good for you and is good for me. And we can do it in a mutually beneficial way. We can do it in a sustainable way. And it has to be rule-based. And when protectionism is growing right now, that is an important signal. Because trade has lifted millions and millions of people out of poverty. And it has improved living standards. That is particularly true in China, of course. China, in a few decades, have become a major importer and exporter of goods. And that is really good. China is an important partner. But it is also a problem, because the Chinese special system leads to imbalances in the international market. And I'm sure the shipping industry have seen that as well. In shipbuilding sector, for instance, there is massive subsidies, as in many other industrial areas. Industrial subsidies that makes the level playing field not very fair for the rest of the world. We see forced technology transfer, cyber theft, dumping, and a lot of problems that China is not living up to the promises it's made when it joined the WTO almost 19 years ago. And that is a problem that we need to address, and we are working with China and others. The way to address it, though, is not by massive tariffs or trade wars. So even if we agree with the US on the analysis, we do not agree with the methods. And the escalating trade war between US and China is bad for shipping and is bad for the world economy. And that's why we are very concerned about this, and we are not the only one, because the latest protectionism and the willingness of the American administration to use tariffs for geopolitical reasons, be it to curb migration in Mexico or to address systemic problems in China, is not the solution. And those tariffs, of course, do not only affect China, it also affects the rest of the world, including Europe, where we have tariffs on steel, aluminium, etc., which is not economically wise, but is also against normal behavior between friends, but also against WTO rules. And that is really problematic when we rather should be working as allies than having these trade tensions. So what do we do in order to address this? Well, we try to have a positive agenda with the US, try to see if we can have a smaller trade negotiations, facilitate regulatory cooperation, etc. We work with the US and Japan to see if we can write new rules in the WTO to address some of the problems of industrial subsidies, forced technology transfer, etc. And we are making these trade agreements in order to increase access for others. Because there is, I mean, the world is a gloomy place right now. Growing protectionism. We also see, well, the list can be long. We see a small, limited, but still important trade war going on between Japan and South Korea. We have worries in the Middle East. We have Brexit coming up. I know that worries a lot of people in the shipping sector. It worries me as well. And since the 1980s, seaborne trade volumes have grown immensely, tripled. And that's a good thing. Will this continue? Well, that's what this panel is going to try to tell you. Of course, protectionism, unpredictability, tariffs, trade wars, environmental challenges, and the change of value chains, etc., is a challenge to this. So what do we try to do? We try to minimize the insecurity buy new market. We try to reform the WTO to make sure that there are global rules. And we try to manage the tensions that are there. That's not easy. But that's just, Carl, want to give a little picture of where we are. I'm sure that next Donsö days, these items will also be very high on the agenda for you to discuss. So thank you for inviting me again, and I'm looking forward to discuss these issues with my excellent co-panelists.
Thank you very much, Jan. So maybe Carl-Henrik, would you want to share some of your sort of thoughts around this topic?
Yeah, let me say just a few words, start with the world and then talk a little bit about energy and trade and where we see things. First of all, I'm very honored to be here. It's great. And for me, Donsö is, with all these shipping people in one little place like this, it becomes a bit like the Silicon Valley in the tech industry. So much of creativity and thoughts that are coming out of here and guiding the industry, and I think that's why Donsö, Gothenburg is close to Donsö, as you said. Let me first just say about the world. I think everyone here, we're born after the Second World War, and we have lived in 70 years of basically peaceful development. Step by step, everything has got a little better. And we have seen more of openness, more of trade, global trade, and we have learned also that globalization is a good thing that drives prosperity and openness. In all of this, of course, developing markets have gone even faster. And for many people there, for billions and billions of people, they have never seen a development like they've seen in the last 30 years and are very happy with things. So sometimes when we talk about that the world is a little here and there, don't forget that it's 20% of the world we are thinking about as we were the world. 80% is actually quite happy with things. We are also seeing how on our side of the world, how actually with the new economy, more digital, that lesser and lesser of the growth that we have is for everyone, and more is for the fewer. So we see increasing inequality that drives populism and dissatisfaction in our part of the world. At the same time, we see China growing very quickly, and Asia in particular, of course. But if the trend continues, it's not so long far away until China takes over as the biggest economic power in the world. We are in all of this. We're actually seeing what you all read about every day. How U.S. is sort of backing off to some extent its leadership role in the world. To some part, maybe that is just Trump. Maybe that changes whenever Trump steps down. But to some extent, it's also the fact that the world, the economic rationales are changing. U.S. isn't that dominant anymore. Their old promise to help preserve peace in the world with their military power and all that doesn't work in a change where there's such a tectonic shift. And also to this comes the maybe two biggest challenges is the digitalization, the digital revolution. It's going to change everything in our lives. How we work, how we study, how we grow old, how we take care of people that are sick. And it's going to rationalize things. It's going to create probably more jobs like we lose through digitalization. It is probably a bit like when the steam machine was invented, when we thought that was the end of labor. But it's not going to be so easy because those people that are losing jobs are not necessarily fit for those that are getting jobs. So this is going to be a big change and a lot of training that needs to happen. Where is the world heading in this? Well, first of all, we see how the center of gravity gradually is moving towards the east. We also see, at least for now, a bit more of my country first, lesser of this openness, and a bit of weakening, as it seems, but you are the expert of free trade. Is that a concept that is actually creates winners, or does it also create losers and tension? We are seeing a world of a power battle here more than before between Asia, primarily China and the US. And the question is, where is Europe ending up here in between these big blocks? Europe is, I think everyone would agree that Europe has the best quality of life in the world for the many. There are places that where you're better off if you have a lot of money, but for the many, Europe has a tradition of bringing everyone along in a better way. But there is a risk now that we become squeezed between these blocks, and the question is, can we stand up for Europe? And I am convinced that we need more of collaboration and inside Europe, more of EU, not more fragmentation. I can't see how we would be better off, every country by themselves. And as Carl Bildt often says, are we going to become a player? Is EU and Europe be a player in the world or a playing field for others? What does all this mean then, for example, for trade? Well, you talked about it. We have seen 30 years of very strong growth of trade. I think trade means prosperity. It's a driver of prosperity. But in a world with more tension on trade, open trade, is that going to have an impact? Probably. You will probably hear Ulrich talk a lot about we are shortening the supply chains. We need to be closer to our suppliers, which probably has an effect on global trade. Might have the opposite effect on local trade. On energy, we are seeing till 2040. Most projections would say the world is probably going to double its GDP in 20 years. Probably see a growth of 60% or so, 50, 60, 70% of energy. That, of course, is key to solve in a world that needs to tackle climate change, which is our other big challenge for the world. There it's interesting to see that if you take the American energy consumption, energy has always grown with increasing energy consumption grows with the growing economy. But since a few years, America has actually come to a break point and starting to slowly decline its energy consumption. That's a major break. Europe did this years ago. And if the US energy consumption is about here, for 300 million people, you find Europe be here, 2/3 of the energy that the US is using, with 500 people. Basically using only half the amount of energy per person, because energy is twice as expensive because of taxes. And we've been irritated. Most of us business people have been in Brussels lobbying about this. But the fact is, here is the US, here is Europe, here is China, India, in a complete explosion. That is only because there are 3 billion people in China, India. We haven't even talked then about 1 billion in Southeast Asia, 1 billion in Africa, 500 million in Latin America. So the big challenge for the world is, of course, where the growth is and where all the people are. Doesn't mean that we won't have to do our part. We are there, we're developing our technology, but if we want to create a better world, we need also to help in the others with technology ideas and best practice. If you look at oil consumption for a minute, that's interesting for a shipper. We are right now consuming about 95 million barrels a day. If you take all the ongoing, take it in the prospect of 50, 60, 70% more energy need in the next till 2040, that 95 would go to 130. We think it might, and most analysts or the International Energy Agency or MIT would sort of guess that you may come to 110. But that means you need to accelerate all the energy efficiency in an even faster way. We think that's possible. But it is still not enough. If we should reach the Paris Agreement, we need to be at 85. But bigger, it's not bigger the difference. So 95 would be 85. That's of course less, but it's not dramatic. It doesn't disappear. If we would not go and drill, which Donsö wants to do, for new, if we didn't go and explore for new, we would drop to 40 million. Because the old wells are depleting fast. So, and if we don't have oil or gas to heat our homes and what have you, that typically ends up in conflicts and wars and trouble. In all of this, one may think that electric cars plays a big role. Cars in total is less than 10% of all production, of oil consumption. And if you are in, we tend to see the world from where we live. So if you go to San Francisco, they would say, well, it's only electric cars today, isn't it? Look at everybody has a Tesla. But the fact is we have 900 million cars in the world today. Forecast for 2040 is 2 billion. A pessimist would say 100 million electric cars. An optimist would say 500 million. Even if you take 500 million, the number of combustion engine cars would grow from 900 to 1.5 billion. So there is a dual challenge for the energy industry. That is to make sure you supply the world with the energy it needs and then drive as fast as we can towards the green energy. And I'm generally, to finish off with climate, I'm generally still an optimist, but I'm not a scientist. So I can't judge whether if we are 10 years too early or too late. Climate is, we have a warming problem. We need to deal with it. But I think there's so much going on from the smallest scientists to the biggest universities, from the startups to the big companies. I think there will be a lot of exciting stuff. And I see that in Volvo, it's advancing very, very quickly. Thank you.
We're gonna have some very interesting discussions shortly, but Alrik, please.
Thank you, and I want to start my 5 minutes by just saying thank you for receiving a slonke from Gamlestan. And I think, honestly, there's much more. Me running a company that's so focused on you, you're all my customers indirectly and directly. I think there's so much more we could do together in many areas, and I will be here all night. So if you want to work more with a slonke, please come and I'll tell you some of the nice things we're doing, probably together. But I was going to go now deep into the nitty-gritty of what I see happening in my sector, which is mostly then machines, machines being produced and shipped around the world. And for the first time, there's not only a political issue, but there's actually a technology issue that is completely changing the way we see the supply chain in the future for machines. I'm not talking about oils, I'm talking about machines. If you want to see the world's most flexible and cost-efficient factory for bigger bearings, please come to Gamlestan. It's completely run by robots, and for the first time, scale, meaning making many and being flexible, doesn't mean that you have a higher cost. So suddenly you can make many or just a few of every kind, and very quickly, digital resetting. So you can make one of one type, and then the next one you make is a different type, etc. And the cost of labor is no longer the issue. So suddenly, when we look at it, other things become an issue. Closeness to the customer, you need to respond quickly, because now you can. So you can look at logistics in a completely different way, and also where you do things. Yes, we can in Europe be competitive in Sweden, in Germany, wherever we want, but also we have to understand that the same kind of technology we will have to use in China. So when I look the way we do today, and I see all of my customers doing the same, we are looking Europe for Europe, Americas for Americas, and Asia for Asia. So one of the contributors, and I apologize for this, if one of you are goods, shipping containers with goods, one of the contributors that as a percentage, less and less of our products are going long haul over the seas to the other nation is that we are building up our manufacturing base in Asia. If you want to see some of the most modern and effective and low-cost bearing manufacturer in the world, please visit SKF in China. So it's not only political, it's also us, the whole industry is doing this. At the same time, as I say, if you want to see one of the most modern and effective and flexible factories in the world, please go to Gamlestan. And then, so what happens now is that we're actually doing this, and we see local shipping around in Asia, around to Malaysia, to China, to Indonesia, and back and forth. That's going up. And shipping from Europe, or the other way, is going down. Then there's another thing that is a little bit the same that Mrs. Malmström talked about Cecilia, is we see also the technology gap is disappearing. Look at yourselves, you're buying your ships from China today. When you look at a big gearbox, 5 years ago, for a windmill, if you wanted it to work, it had to come from Germany, it could come from Sweden, it could come from the Czech Republic, could come from some factories in the US, not all. But today it can come from China. You know, there are excellent gearbox manufacturers. So if you buy a Vestas windmill today, there's about a 30% chance that your gearbox is actually coming from China. So this sort of structural thing we had in our favor, that we were sending things to China because it was growing, etc., today they are becoming more and more self-sufficient. And yes, it's because sometimes nagging on our stealing technology, but we are also doing it. You know, there's no, if SKF wants to be relevant in the world's biggest bearing market, we have to be there. And when I look at all my customers, they're thinking the same. So it doesn't, I think this is positive. For you, it means more local transport, maybe less global transport. And then there's another one. We're looking at integrated planning, digitalization, we talk a lot about it. But one of the things it means is that we are now putting in place what we call integrated planning. We know where all the bearings are in SKF in the world at all times. This means that we can look at logistics in a completely different way. And as we log into our customers' machines, we know with a lot longer foresight when things will happen in the machine, and we can plan our logistics in a completely different way. And of course, here we would like to work with you, the shipping companies and the forwarding companies, to lower the transportation cost by filling better your containers, planning better so that we don't have the risk that suddenly the boat is stopping somewhere and we didn't know about it, etc., etc. And here is a fantastic opportunity. So please work with a Slonke from Gamlestan, and we'll do it together.
So it is a very new environment that here, and you see the panel, why it's so intelligently put together, in my view, that here we have new manufacturing, we have a meta trend with 130 million barrels a day, and then Cecilia, we have this short-term, hopefully, bump on the road. How serious is that when you are seeing these other meta trends? The fact that politics right now is sort of challenging trade and volumes moving across the world?
Well, I would say that it is challenges in the way that and Carl-Henrik touched upon that as well, the global system that we created after the Second World War, with international institutions, with certain international rules, with multilateralism, with a strong alliance between Europe and US, is kind of maybe not falling apart, but is definitely weakened. And that focuses politicians' mind on so many other things. In Europe, we have spent 2 years totally obsessed by the Brexit issue. A lot of time, a lot of resources has gone to that. Also trying to manage, from a Europe perspective, trying to manage the effects of possible global trade war, impacts of tariffs on steel, aluminium, car parts, which will affect you indirectly as well. And that means that the political mindset is not there where it should be, working together with industry, with big business and small business, grasping this new revolution, this new technologies, these new possibilities. So it is definitely contributing to slowing that process, and that is very unfortunate. The process in itself is bad for the economy, and I'm not the only one warning for this. I mean, World Bank, IMF, OECD, they're all putting up their quite worrying reports about where this is heading for the global economy, but also that it is focusing the political minds in the wrong way, and that makes us lose a lot of energy and focus, and that's bad for Europe.
But from a long-term point of view, I mean, what Carl-Henrik is pointing to is that if we're seeing a doubling of global GDP by 2040, is this a bump in the road, or can it really derail the prospects that many of us are actually investing against?
You asking me that?
Again. Sorry.
Well, I'm not the Oracle of Delphi, but I hope it's a bump in the road. And I hope that we are coming to senses and see that this is not good for any of us and that we should work together as allies. But for the short term, it is definitely gloomy, I would say.
I don't know if you want to comment that, Karl-Henrik, because I think so. You make a very compelling case that common sense, normal human beings just want a better life, and it's so rational to trade, and that force in itself, you would think, would have a lot of power.
Yeah, I would think that it's a bit of a bump on the road because it's anything else would be stupid. But the fact is, when you start to play with these tariff weapons and things, you make people like us nervous. So you will sort of say, I mean, I'm sure it's the same with you as well. I mean, if I look at the truck driver, he can change a truck a typical driver should change it every 7 years. But it doesn't mean that it breaks down on the end of the 7th year. He can keep it for 10 years. Maintenance is going to go up, and it's not going to be as efficient, but hold off a bit. If the whole world goes into a sort of slowing mood, this is going to have an effect. I think more now than the downturn that we start to see the shapes of, I think is more almost made by ourselves. It is not an overheating or overcapacity in the industry, and I think it's the effect of that. Over time, the pendulum tends to swing. So I would be less worried about 2040 in a way than 2022 or so. The only thing, like, if I want to be a bit gloomy, because if you look at 1,000 years, you can see that peace times have often been like 70 years, 60, 70, because that's 2-3 generations. And you forget about the horrors that you went through. You hear about it, but you weren't near it. So you get less nervous to play with fire again. So you would just hope that we can keep the world together. But I would be generally hopeful for the longer term.
Because, of course, as us as ship owners, I mean, we work on a very long time perspective.
Yeah.
If we order a vessel today, we get delivery 2023, written off 2043, and depending how you operate it, you're sort of 2050. So, of course, we make decisions today where we calculate sort of the exposure 2030 and 2040 rather than maybe 2025. And even if I know it is impossible to sort of say anything about the future, many of the people in the audience are actually betting their lives on a direction here. And that's why I think it's so interesting to sort of understand that. Is it so that from 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, China's joining the WTO, the internet bubble, I mean, or not bubble, the internet boom, oh, sorry. That was about fluga. And of course, for us, it's so easy to extrapolate from 1989 and forward, just the last 30 years. And would you dare, sort of the next, say, 20 years, if we take away that next 5 years of political risk, would we be on a trend line since 30 years back, or are we seeing a new world?
I would bet on a positive development.
Yeah. Okay, so we have this mentometer thing that technology, forget about it, we won't do it. Okay. How many in the audience believe in a continued positive world like Karl-Henrik does? Okay. Oh, there we go. So there we have the audience. Okay. Yes.
Yes, we're on.
Optimism is a duty, as Karl Popper said.
Yeah.
You have to be an optimist.
No, but bravo. I think this is wonderful in the sense that sort of how are we taking this forward? Because that moves over to Alrik. Yeah?
But I think that one of the things that we must not forget that creates a lot of optimism is this enormous technology shift that we're living. You know, it's fantastic. And again, you're all invited. Carl-Johan can arrange it to come and see our
You're
factory.
You're a working commercial.
Yes. But I want to also graphically say this, how you can see how this is a fantastic contributor of value to society. And with digitalization, where we integrate everything, and with automation, there is so much waste that we can take out of the systems that can propel the well-being of society for a good time forward. So I am definitely positive.
And I would just like to say the reason why I'm mentioning also the darker scenario, which I think it's quite unlikely, but we had parents and grandparents that died for creating the society we have of democracy, of openness, and the values we stand for. And there is a risk that our generation, that the coming generation, starts to take things for granted. This is a time to stand up for what we believe in. And I think that if we do that, we will also get through it in a good way.
But I also think I see it myself with my own son, who's moving to China in September. So he speaks Chinese, he's 28 years old, and he's moving to China. And so there's a generation also with a completely different view. And of course, the way they look at it, he looks at it with his friends, been living in China, he has a completely different view. He said, hey, you oldies, you don't understand, you know. We're just going together and we're going to make it happen.
Both Karl-Henrik and Ulrik, you represent companies that are very big customers directly to many of us, or customers to our customers. If we then say as ship owners, we dare now invest in ships, what kind of vessels would you dare to look for, say in a 10-year perspective? You've touched upon sort of robotization, automation. What does that mean for trade flows?
How about a flexible ship that after a few years cheaply can be rebuilt from one kind of cargo to the other? Could that be something we could conceive together?
Novel, yeah.
No, but I mean, this is what I think is needed, you know, flexibility. And when you say that you are looking at investment horizons of 30 years, is that really true? I have heard rumors that Stena is looking at flexible ships, you know, that can be readapted after a while. Is it true?
No, but no, by the way, of course, flexibility is definitely.
Transport will be there. Transport will be there. What kind of cargo you don't know. If we can be more flexible in building our ships so they can be flexed a little bit more, well, you have the recipe, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. For those of you,
I'm a slonke.
Okay.
You know.
And for those of you who haven't been to Ulrik's factory, it's actually quite cool in the sense that all of a sudden you can build a factory in a totally different scale. And for me, as you were, both of you were saying, that really means regional distribution. And we've had an era now where we've had large scale since the Industrial Revolution 150 years back. We've built larger and larger vessels. And of course, a huge conversation we have within our communities is between size and service. So sort of the larger you build, the more difficult it is to uphold a sort of a real-time high-frequency service versus the rationality of having large volumes. Are we seeing a shift there from a production point of view?
Definitely. You know, can you imagine, today we are looking at producing for the paper industry, for instance, in the aftermarket on demand. So we have a sensor at the paper mill, wherever it is in the world. We know months ahead that there's going to be this and this position we need to change, and we can plan for that together with you. And we can have the optimate route, and we can have the optimate transporting. And we're not transporting inventory, we're actually transporting something that would be put in the machine when it arrives. So suddenly, it must arrive on time, it must be environmentally friendly way of transporting, and we have the foresight to work together with you to optimize the flows. And this is going to take another 10 years, and then we will be there.
Karl-Henrik, would you dare say something? Most of the ship owners here are actually tanker ship owners.
First of all, your ships will run effectively for a long time. But if you're also, to the extent you're building new, just prepare for the digital revolution. Make sure that those ships are digital. And if we're looking at Volvo, for example, how we working with harbors to totally digitalize harbors and all of those things, and the supply chains we're looking for needs to be seriously integrated and just on time. So that whole supply chain thing through your ships will be a long or a short digital effective system. So prepare for that.
And Cecilia, just moving the conversation on, that me partially representing the ferry sector, the smallest ferries we have that are running into Europe are basically the largest ferries that are running between China and Korea, the world's largest and third largest economies, which just goes to show in order to do these rationalizations, we need a legal framework, of course, that is compatible and that we can run through borders. Silla, can you comment sort of on anything that the success that we've had in the EU, despite now Brexit, is that something that we could see that would be replicated in other parts of the world, or that we could sort of the single use of, or the single rules sort of kind of system that we have on the shipping side through the IMO, but we definitely don't have on the land side, and which is, in my view, inhibiting the much of the efficiency that we would like to see on the logistics side?
Well, in this area, like in many others, of course, we need global rules, and we can't. There are lots of international cooperation. You are probably represented in some of that, but we do need global rules on that, and that is extremely important right now as well. What we are trying to do, of course, you have to consolidate within the European Union via our different cooperation trade agreements, but also association agreements. We try to sort of export the standards of of Europe and make them international, and that is going to be behind the scenes. That is very important, as you say, that the rules and the regulations are the same. So that is constant, ongoing work. Slow, technical, a bit boring, but extremely important.
So one thing is global rules. I was also thinking about if we can get regional clusters of rules. We had a conversation here this morning about a global carbon tax, and you, Carl-Henrik, said that that's a pie in the sky. It won't happen in the short term. Therefore, let's try to be realistic and not utopian. Fair enough. But I was just more thinking in other parts of the world, because it's so apparent, the benefits of common rules. However, the impossibility of getting this sort of broad-based globally, fine, but that we're finding regional clusters of rules. Do you see any, are you inspiring other areas of the world to go down the journey that the EU has?
Well, I think many of the regional corporations that exist are looking into EU. I think sometimes we forget what we have accomplished in the European Union with the internal market, although not perfect still, but the most developed in the world. So when I speak to my friends from the ASEAN countries, for instance, they are looking at trying to copy and to work with us as much as possible. A global carbon tax would, of course, be the thing, but I agree with Carl-Henrik, it's not going to happen tomorrow. And it's difficult enough just to get it in Europe right now, because it has to do with taxes and who decides and so on. Now there is a growing discussion within the OECD on some sort of border tax adjustment. Still very vague what that could be. It has, of course, to be non-discriminatory. It has to be in compliance with international rules, WTO, and so on. But this is not only in the EU. Canada are talking about that. Also, some of the Latin American countries and others. So in OECD, there is a discussion on that. So I think it is gradually coming, but you just need to see how to. I mean, the devil there is really in the details. But I think it is coming, and Europe is probably going to take the lead here. But you need as many countries as possible to follow. But then, of course, without the US, it will be difficult. But you could start.
Yeah, we're betting on it. We are developing a new wastewater or ballast water treatment system that we're launching next year, just betting on that there's going to be world regulation on ballast water, for instance.
Yeah, the salesman, yeah.
Gamlestan.
No,
Next year I will have to say, oh, Göteborg, that's close to Gamlestan, isn't it? Yeah.
No, just a comment on these emission schemes. When I was with BP, we helped Guangdong to set up an emissions trading scheme. Because we have our thoughts, but I mean, they need to clean their cities. It's not long ago that I landed on a very sunny day in Beijing, and you had to go through an instrument landing because you don't have sight. You can't see across the street. So I mean, they have all reasons in the world to be green. So I think we are likely to see that China, for cleaning the cities point of view, will be leaders in green in many, many fields.
So before we just go on to green, just your comments here from Volvo, where you were looking at integration from ports and sort of other parts of the logistics chain, is sort of what I think Ulrich is also alluding to, that we as ship owners, sort of the day when we could transport things from A to B on a vessel, and all of a sudden we're part of a much wider supply chain, and that we have to look at sort of optimization across different sectors. Is that something that you would be looking for as a buyer of?
Oh, absolutely, and I think you may come on to that, but if I look also in and I'm sure you have a similar situation, but if I look at truck transportation, we have an average load factor of maybe 60%. And if you, some years ago, you may recall that President Modi was in Sweden from India, and we had helped him with a study of optimizing this, because India, if you look at the forecast for India for 2050, it's 10 times more traffic than you have today. That's just not possible. But you have 300-400 million people that are moving into cities, and you have all this transportation going to happen. If you then could sort of take down the load factor or bring up the load factor to closer to 100 from where it is today, 50, 60, is an absolutely must. And I think that this is something I also learned when I was CEO of Ericsson. Ericsson would never hesitate if there was anything you could come up with that might kill part of your business. They would go for it immediately, because otherwise somebody else goes for it, and you're second. So don't hesitate, just go for it. And I think also in that whole supply chain, for us, that's part of making our region competitive with the world, if we can take advantage of that.
Could you give us some tips? Because I think many of us are actually in commoditized shipping. We end up furthest down in a hierarchy where it's sort of price, price, and price, and not even the environmental people actually we get to meet. And sort of breaking a cycle where we actually can be part of improving a value chain, so that we jointly can take away your 50% sort of empty container, opens up for a new type of collaboration. Would you have any tips of how do we get out of a situation where we feel that many of our counterparts are actually commoditizing us intentionally?
Well, I think I think it would be interesting to study transportation from A to B, from where it starts to where it ends, and including shipping and everything in there. If one really could have a good discussion there, and sort of as partners do, you are really open and you look for how, not just how you can, because sometimes it's a matter of, can I get more value of somebody else? But how do I also help bringing something to the table? I think this could be a very fruitful discussion, and we have several companies we could do it all in Gothenburg to start with.
Yeah. And I just think for the audience here, I mean, the uniqueness in Gothenburg, that here we have these great companies, we all live more or less next door neighbors to each other, and I think this is really the strong point of the geographic situation that we're in.
We have to, it's easy to say, we have to break the silos, right? We have to work, as Carl-Henrik says, through the value chain. And it's what troubles me sometimes. It's actually sometimes easier to do with our friends in Asia than it is with our friends in Europe, you know. And even here in Gothenburg sometimes, you know, it's harder sometimes to work together here than it is with somebody in Asia or further away. And I think here we can do, you as leaders, you are entrepreneurs like nobody else. You can take the lead here, and if you call on us, I'm sure we'll come.
No, but I think this is an extremely important comment, and maybe you want to elaborate it even more, because in the morning session we said that we actually were cutting edge when it comes to environmental performance in tankers and in many other fields, and we have the Wallenius initiatives with sales and LNG, and we have what we're doing with methanol and Stena, and we have sort of in a number of areas where we think we are adaptable and quick, and here you're telling us that sort of 8 time zones away, it's a very different attitude. Can you drive that point home one more time?
Well, what I mean is that we in Europe, in many countries, we have this, that no change. This recipe has been doing fine. We have unions, we have governments, and we are very reluctant to change. But if you go to Latin America or you go to China, say, oh, you've got something new. Can you tell me tomorrow? And then we also come from this, that, you know, not invented here syndrome. And you know, you are probably, you must be one of the world's most innovative and entrepreneurial center in the world. I mean, there would be no way, if you were not entrepreneurial, risk-taking, fast and innovative, that you would have created what you have here on Donsö. We need to become as entrepreneurial as you have been. You, on the other hand, it's going to be difficult for you in little Donsö to continue to do it if you don't tap into knowledge that it's outside. So I think it's an absolute fantastic opportunity to have the world political arena, Volvo and your fantastic network, and this little guys from Gamlestan to come here together with you, and you know, you could call on a meeting where we would come and we would discuss how do we do this together. And instead of me traveling tomorrow, on Friday, I have some Chinese coming who wants to sign a special cooperation agreement. You know, it's like an avalanche of Chinese wanting to do this. This is how Mr. Xi, by the way, is trying to circumvent the trade barriers. They're coming. I've never had, during the last 4 years, so many Chinese coming over and doing this. I don't have a cooperation agreement, I think, with any of you. Strategic cooperation. Well, with Stena we have that, yes. But with the rest of you, I don't have.
So we should make Sweden the Donsö of the world. So that we
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
No, but we have to work with our strengths, of course, and that sort of brings us on to the environmental side. Just sort of again as purchasers of cargo, now representing the cargo owners that actually are our customers. Could we have a frank conversation, because it is very challenging for us. The vast majority of our customers do not pay a premium in any way or form for higher environmental performance. And therefore the financial incentive is very tough when I think the day rate on MR tankers today is $11,000 a day, which is half of what we need for break even. So in that kind of environment, very few ship owners, other than the Donsö ship owners, actually dare take that step and boldly say we're now moving on to a new technology. But as we spoke about this morning, Sweden is 0.1% of global shipping, and I would argue Donsö is strongly in the lead. And sort of in a world where nobody really knows, and we make these bets sort of 20, 30 years on ahead. What aspects of environmental performance are important for you? And then I'll ask Cecilia from a legislative point of view shortly.
Well, I first of all, I think when it comes, I think we all understand that the change is coming, the change is going to happen. It's not going to, there's nothing we can get away from. And it must be, for anyone, a stupid idea, having spent 10 years in BP, but stupid idea to dig out fossil fuel from the ground and burn it up in the atmosphere. What is right with that? But that's the way we have done it, and if we hadn't done it, we would have been living on the standards of the 1500s. So access to energy is absolutely key, affordable energy. But I think in all of those things that you talk about, I don't think in the long run that it necessarily has to be more expensive. It could be when you take certain steps and you try out, but you need to get your feet wet. Get in there, because it's going to happen, and you will fall behind if you don't. And experiment. And I can say from a Volvo perspective, when I look at the plans that if you go back 2 years, we would have said, we're not going to see an electric truck on the road in the next 6-7 years. Today we're planning for electric trucks next year. The battery costs have come down with 90% over a short period of time. So it's happening so fast. So it's important to get our arms around it. And the best way of doing that is to get your feet wet and experiment and deal with it, because it will happen.
Yeah, and I mean, we're so focused on this. I have two things. I think it's going to change. I think this, that nobody's paying for it, is partly true. I agree with you today, but it's going to change. I was with a big American investor just last week who told me, first time my investors are willing to take a lower return and be more patient if the investment is green. I've never really heard that from an American top investor before. That's one. And the other thing is, I think Carl-Henrik is absolutely right. You know, for instance, one of the things we're doing is you don't have to throw away the bearings. They can be reused, not recycled, reused. Now we're talking circular economy. If you would work with us, for instance, we could guarantee that most of the bearings in your ships can be remanufactured, don't need to be thrown away, meaning you don't have to melt them down and then again with a lot of energy. Sort of. We have a new oil technology where we're looking to work with you to see to it that you don't have to change your oil so often because it's always clean in your process and things like that. And that all of this, what I'm talking about, we know is at a lower cost. So I agree fully with you. If you have the guts to stick out your neck, it can be less expensive. Yeah!
So Cecilia, this whole thing of us having to wait for legislation rather than industry sort of taking leadership and taking the sort of much of the risk by itself, how do you see legislation moving forward the next couple of years in Europe?
Well, in many areas, the industry is far beyond legislation, which is good. I mean, what you are saying and many others are telling how they use green technology, how it is initially a little bit difficult, but then it becomes profitable, and it's what people want, because the sustainability, climate friendliness is not a trend that will pass. This is something that has come to stay. The citizens demand that of all of us in order to have trust in the system. So it will come more tougher legislation, more legislation, and hopefully also these new partnerships that you are talking about within countries, but between countries, but also between academy, research, innovation, companies, in order to see how can we invent new technologies, how can we make our industry or our sector greener. And then the legislation has to support that, of course, with research, with funding, with innovation, and with working, trusting that the industry also knows what to do. There is an ongoing global process that is right now a bit stalled, again, because of the US, a big international agreement called Environmental Goods Agreement, where the big economies of the world were intending to take away tariffs on environmentally friendly goods, like the one you are referring to, but many others as well. This is something that could boost innovation in this. And then there will be legislation. Ideally, it would be global, but it will probably have to start being regional. So it will come. That's why we also need this kind of dialogue. You talk about dialogue and cooperation, but also with the political sector, because many in the political sphere today do not know what fantastic things you are doing. On the field, the daily innovation, the responsibility that you are taking because your employees, your customers demand that of you, and think that there's a big resistance from industry, but it's not. It's just that you need predictability, you need to have a dialogue, you need to have openness, and you need to support it and not just come with legislation as a surprise. So it will definitely come, and I fully agree that this is the future, not only because otherwise the planet will not survive, but it is economically wise thing to do, and there are lots of statistics showing this, that it is actually very, very profitable. It will be difficult in big sectors when big changes will have to be done. Shipping sector is, of course, one as well, but again, referring to what you have done here in Donsö together with your partners, you can lead the way.
Yeah, and I don't know of any larger corporation that doesn't have striving for green or clean tech on the top of the agenda. I don't know of any. Some talk more and do less, but all say this. Yeah. And Cecilia, when you become the Prime Minister, it's done.
Yes, yes, yes. There we go. I want to let that one hang in the air for a while. That was well done, well done. Well, but we're here not to talk about Cecilia's future, but to talk about shipping's future. And I was sort of where I would like this argument to flow, of course, is that up until the railway sort of broke through in the 1860s, 1870s, most of world trade or domestic trade, whether it's regional or local, was at sea. And of course, those of us who represent sort of the marine trades here, if we are truly going to build sustainable cities, if we're truly going to build sustainable societies, we have this fantastic medium called the water. I mean, it basically has unlimited capacity. From a ton-mile point of view, in absolute terms, we have a lot to do. In relative terms, we think it's one of the better ways of moving cargo. And most importantly, it doesn't cost the taxpayer a penny. And would you see sort of a scenario when we're looking sort of 15, 20 years ahead, that we're actually going to see logistics chains that move from land and use our waterways and the sea to a larger extent? Karl-Henrik.
Martin Lundstedt today, our CEO, he said in a statement that we're doing everything we can to bring the transported goods from the air down to the ground, into the lorries, into the ships. And I think that is something that happens. You get more of that, the more well-run the company is. And the more or less planned and erratic and emergencies left and right, then you end up air shipping. But I can't imagine that there isn't a very strong future for shipping for a very long time.
I can tell you that we have promised our shareholders in the world that we're going to substantially reduce our CO2 impact during the next coming years. And we have a plan to reduce air freight and to increase as much as we can sea freight, because it is the most environmentally friendly per ton, a kilometer, so to speak. Clearly, there are things, as I said before, that will make this difficult that we will not do that on the long run. But in the sort of North or European or Southeast Asia or in Asia and between the different countries, definitely. And we have this on, because otherwise we won't be able to reach our goals. So it's a must.
Yeah. And Cecilia, when you and the Commission are looking at Europe in the future, how important sort of is there sea blindness, or are the maritime aspects sort of on the table?
Absolutely, they are, and increasingly so, I would say. And especially now with so many partners that we have who have a fleet on their own, where we have, for instance, I was mentioning Singapore, Korea, Japan. I mean, shipping is very important for them as well. So we embed our partnership in cooperation, research, trying to work together to make maritime transport and shipping more environmentally friendly, and there are lots of very interesting projects going on there. But you're absolutely right. This is the trend: down from the air and on trains and on ships. We just need to make them even more environmentally friendly. This is going to be the aim of, well, the new Commission is not there yet, but from what I hear, this is going certainly to be a priority for them as well.
Because that is one of our concerns, is that sort of an aspect of shipping, of trade, so sort of in a Europe where we will have Brexit, that sort of the conversation is still around openness and liberties. And just if you're just the least historically interested, I mean, the societies at each point in time that have been open societies and open to trade, which has been shipping, have in each time have been the most prosperous and the most affluent of societies, and therefore that we do not have a continental viewpoint of the world also in the future from a European point of view, but that we see ourselves as maritime, and we don't forget that 71 or 73% of the world's sort of area is actually water with an enormous potential.
No, but I think that's correct. And again, coming back to what I said before, there is a lot of obsession on the current political problems right now and the challenges. And one of the Brexit issues is, of course, shipping. And what will we do? Fishing, shipping, our maritime relations, how shall we sort that out? And that is a headache, and I know Stena is, and many of you are thinking about that, and so am I, believe me. I don't have a good solution to that right now. But for the rest, I mean, there are many important maritime powers in the European Union, so it is definitely on the agenda. Greece, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, maybe not Austria, but...
But if we'd had another table here, we would actually have a fourth panelist, and that would have been Claes Berglund, who is actually working for Stena, who's now the incoming chairman of the European Shipowners Association.
Sorry, who?
Claes Berglund.
Oh, yes.
Oh, Claes, are you here somewhere? Claes, Yes, he's in the back. Okay. So Claes is and that of course is also quite neat that from a Swedish Gothenburg Donsö sort of point of view that we're part of now setting for a number of years the agenda in a period of time when lots of things are up in the air actually, and us being able to actively sort of work beyond this region, but actually part of a global dialogue, and where we're, of course, extremely anxious that Europe is sort of retains its relevance, even in a world that is rapidly shifting over to China. So
We have to speed up.
we do. So, summing up this conversation, I don't know if you would dare now maybe give some advice to the ship owners and capitalists in the room of what kind of a vessel would you buy if you were in this situation? If you dare, if you don't, I'll help you out. Well, we can try this one: a tanker. I mean, if we're going to have 130 million barrels a day over the next, or it's going to peak there, that's a 35% growth, which I think is so a tanker. A smaller tanker, because it's regional high-frequency distribution.
And a ship where maybe you could have liquid on one way and maybe take some of our goods.
You're going too far again. No,
that's so difficult.
Alrik, please.
That was the wrong answer.
But we will try to move to as much as we can to inter-regional shipping, yes. And that's more frequent and of course then not so big.
And if we invest in state-of-the-art technology, so we have an emissions profile that is better than anybody else, you're willing to pay for that? Share the cost?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to meet our targets, we have to find these kind of... but then you have to work through the silos. We cannot go to a spedition firm, for instance, who's hiring the ships for us, and they have no clue. Then we can't sort of take it into our books. We have to, if we make a deal on that, it has to be sort of then monitored, and then it of course, it depends on how much it is. But I believe so. I mean, we're starting to come there. We need to reach our targets, and it must be allowed to cost.
Well, first of all, I think you framed the areas, target areas to go for. But I would answer it somewhat differently, because I would say, first of all, I think that the future of shipping, and especially I would say regional shipping, with the supply chain changes, I think is bright. So, but what I would do, there's an old expression that what brought us here won't keep us here. One cannot continue to do things the way one have done things. One have to continuously innovate, and that's why I think Donsö is so strong. That's why Silicon Valley is strong, Shenzhen in China is strong. So embrace digital. It's going to happen, and find the benefits of that. And embrace green, because it's going to happen. And then go into discussions and partnerships. Would you accept cost increases? Well, you don't, unless there's a value to it. I would think normally you would find the value yourself. So it doesn't have to be more expensive. Can we find value because we look at the whole chain? We're only interested in total cost of ownership for the truck driver at the end of the day. Then the answer would be yes. But embrace change.
And much of that change, I think you both alluded to it, is working much more across sectors, and the days when we were only shipping companies maybe are gone, in the sense that we need that strategic conversation, and we get that when we add real value, and we sort of decommoditize ourselves, I guess, partially through the environmental aspects that we would be providing. And
I believe that when there are solutions, Cecilia and her friends will see to it that legislation will drive us. I mean, I see that big change in China. I tell you, it was not only 10 years ago when the mayor of one of the towns where we are, he said, "Why are you doing more than the legislation is telling you? You know, this is just stupid." And that same person today is saying, "Oh, we need to do more. We need to do more." So it's going to change.
And Cecilia, we can afford to be optimistic here because of the good job that you and your colleagues are doing in sort of the public sector and setting policy, despite sort of the challenges that you have. But would you have one last word to us to round this off, of sort of Even though industry will lead, we understand that clearly. But what can we do to support you and your colleagues in setting a global level playing field that we also need?
Well, I think it's been very good advice given here about being green, being innovative, working together, thinking new, etc. But also to tell the bigger world. I mean, we are here, a crowd. We share the same views. I mean, you know much more than I do, obviously, on this. But tell the bigger world what you are doing, because people don't know. And there is a knowledge gap in the political sector that all this is happening, apart from those who really focused on this sector. And we need to do so much more, and we need to do it quite quickly, because otherwise Europe will go even further behind other events in Asia and elsewhere. So tell the world, tell the public what you are doing and what we should be doing to help you, because this conversation needs to move out to a bigger crowd.
Ladies and gentlemen, Cecilia Malmström, Carl-Henrik Svanberg, Alrik Danielsson, Gothenburg's contribution to the world. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
And Carl-Johan Hagman, giving a big hand.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Quite amazing, right? I live here to see these kind of giants having this fantastic seminar at my island, at your island. Actually, I got a tear in my eye. Thank you, once again, thank you. And you know what? The good news is the day has just started. So we, in the tent in the harbor, we are preparing for the gala dinner. And before that, you can either visit the exhibition area, where we will have a pre-dinner drink, so you're more than welcome to that. And also there's an open vessel, Ekstream, open their doors to you if you want to visit. So you're also more than welcome to that. So thanks for now, and see you later.